She was simply an elderly woman residing in a secluded cabin. Her existence was characterized by quietude and dimness until a particular snowstorm altered the course of events. Concealed under strata of ice and apprehension, she discovered them, 3 German shepherd puppies, scarcely alive, forsaken, overlooked, yet somehow observing her with eyes that held a profound understanding. The events that ensued were more than a mere rescue, they marked the inception of something inexplicable to them all. 3 creatures bearing a hidden truth and 1 woman, fractured by life's hardships, gradually mending herself through the comfort of their connection. Yet, the puppies' reciprocal actions will astonish you, for at times the most potent narratives of affection are not among humans but between the afflicted and the devoted who remain steadfast. The snow had completely obscured the sky. The world beyond Martha Elrod's cabin was an expanse of white, boundless and unervingly still, save for the rhythmic ticking of an aged mantel clock and the gentle creaking of her rocking chair. She sat in solitude, her gaze fixed upon a deteriorating photograph of her deceased husband, George, their expressions of joy captured permanently beside a mountain lake. He had passed 10 winters prior, 10 protracted winters, and the quietness had only intensified. Martha, previously vibrant with mirth and spirit, now moved with a caution as if fearing she might shatter. Her hands, formerly adept at quilting and crafting festive wreaths for the local center, quivered subtly as she added another piece of wood to the stove. She engaged in conversation with no one. Her excursions from the cabin were infrequent, limited to retrieving mail which had been undelivered for days owing to the severe snowstorm. Her sole associates were the sparrows she nourished each morning and the elongated shadows that fell across her wooden floors as evening approached. Then a noise arose, faintly perceptible above the wind's roar, yet clearly distinguishable, a high-toned cry, brief and imploring. She stopped instantly. It was not the creak of a tree limb or the moan of the wind, this was the sound of a living being in distress. She retrieved her coat, still imbued with the aroma of cedarwood and burning logs, and ventured outdoors. The frigid air struck her with force. Her footwear plunged into the newly fallen snow as she traced the sound towards the edge of the woods where pine trees formed an irregular, bare boundary around her property. The cries intensified, becoming more agitated, and were now accompanied by a feeble scratching, like paws on frozen ground. Her heart thumping, she noticed something, a partially buried wooden container concealed by a ripped tarpaulin. She hurried towards it, her breathing shallow and visible in the cold, and pulled it open. Within were 3 German shepherd puppies, minuscule and trembling, their coats matted with snow and grime. One of them was motionless. Oh my goodness," she murmured, tears immediately filling her eyes. Her hands shook as she carefully lifted them, one after another, into her coat. The 3rd puppy took a faint, shallow breath. It was still alive, but just barely. She staggered back to the cabin, her age overcome by a surge of adrenaline. Once inside, she placed every warm towel she possessed into the oven, enveloped the puppies as if they were delicate porcelain, and positioned them near the hearth. There was no telephone reception, no nearby neighbors for miles, and no assistance on its way, only her. And these fractured young lives, uninvited yet, for which she suddenly felt an overwhelming, soul-deep responsibility. That evening, Martha remained awake. She observed their respiration, anticipating that one might cease. However, they did not. They survived. And in that instant, a change occurred within her, akin to a long-dormant ember reigniting. Yet, the question remained, why had they been abandoned there, amidst a snowstorm, so near her dwelling? This constituted the initial enigma, and it was by no means the final one. Herein lies a turn of events. This situation transcended merely rescuing canines. The affection these puppies returned to Martha is of a legendary quality. Rarely encountered. Continue with the narrative, as the subsequent segment might just melt something profound within you. The cabin, typically as quiet and motionless as a tomb, was now a hive of activity. Martha moved with a speed she hadn't displayed in ages, rummaging through drawers, tearing open towels, and adjusting the old oven to the highest, safest temperature it could sustain without burning. The puppies rested, curled together in a basket beside the fire, their small forms enveloped in every piece of warm material she could locate. She hadn't handled her husband's substantial flannel shirts for many years, but now they served as coverings. Her own preferred woolen socks were fitted over the puppies like miniature garments. This was not a matter of solace, it was a matter of existence. One of the puppies, more diminutive than its siblings, distinguished by a muted black mark over its eye, lay still. Martha placed her hand on its chest. There was no movement, no respiration, only quietness. No, she murmured, her voice breaking as she carefully massaged its ribs. A memory surfaced, something from her 16th year, when she volunteered at an animal shelter with her sister prior to the tragic incident that claimed her sister's life, cardiopulmonary resuscitation for animals. She cupped the puppy's delicate form in her hands, administered 2 gentle compressions followed by another. There was still no response. Her eyes stung with tears. Another compression and then, unexpectedly, a faint gasp. A minuscule breath, feeble yet genuine. The surge of alleviation almost made her stumble. She held him closely against her, murmuring repeatedly, "You're all right. You're secure now." Dawn arrived, casting its wan light across the ice-covered windows. Martha had not rested, yet she felt no fatigue. The puppies, now completely alert, tottered on shaky limbs. Their eyes, still not sharply focused, surveyed the room before fixing on her. It was peculiar, even unsettling. They emitted no barks, no whimpers. They simply observed her as if they perceived something or someone familiar. She bestowed names upon them: Blaze, the most robust, with flame-like patterns on his back; Shadow, the quiet one, who moved little but kept his gaze steadily on her; and Rusty, the smallest one she had resuscitated, whose tail was the first to wag. That morning, she divided her oatmeal with them, mashing it into a soft consistency and feeding it to them by the fire. It was not conventional dog nourishment, but it was warm and satisfying, and they showed no displeasure. As the day progressed, their connection developed rapidly, like tendrils entwining her heart. Each breath they took, every small sneeze or yawn, seemed to provide a rationale for her own continued existence. She found herself humming while laundering their towels. Humming. She had not even uttered a word aloud for days prior to this. However, there was an additional element, something she could not disregard. These canines were unlike those from her upbringing. They were vigilant, excessively so. When the direction of the wind shifted, they sensed it before she did. When the kettle emitted its whistle, they reacted with a start, not from apprehension but from instinct, akin to soldiers conditioned to anticipate more than mere steam following an abrupt noise. Later that evening, she observed Blaze seated at the window, gazing out at the snow, his ears twitching with accuracy, his head tilted slightly as if he could discern a distant sound. That night, as she reclined on the sofa enveloped in her husband's old blanket, the puppies clustered at her feet. For the first time in many years, she experienced a novel sensation in her chest, not sorrow, not solitude, but a sense of mission. A delicate, unaccustomed glimmer of connection. Yet this feeling, however comforting, was accompanied by an unnerving premonition. For an intuition suggested this was not merely a fortuitous rescue. These puppies had not simply stumbled upon her, they had been directed to her. And whatever they were fleeing from had not yet relinquished its pursuit. Stay tuned, because Martha's next discovery will alter all her assumptions about the tranquil existence she had established in the woods. It commenced with a growl, not of the playful sort, nor the tentative bark young puppies emit while chasing their tails. The sound was deep, sustained, and chilling. Blaze stood at the window, his body rigid, ears erect, gaze fixed on something beyond the frost-adorned pane. Martha, who had been drinking tepid tea by the fire, felt that growl resonate within her, as if the cabin itself had released an ancient breath. She rose unhurriedly and neared the window. Only whiteness was visible, yet Blaze remained motionless. His nose twitched. His tail, typically wagging with inquisitiveness, was held low and unmoving. Then she perceived them, boot prints recently made. They encircled the cabin, methodical, uniformly spaced, and sizable. Too large to be hers, too recent for the storm that had just abated. They originated from the woods, looped around the rear of the cabin, and then vanished back into the trees. Whoever the visitor was had approached her very door and departed without a knock. Martha's hands quivered slightly as she closed the curtain. Her thoughts, unbidden, leaped back to an evening 3 decades prior, when a man with furious eyes and trembling hands had shattered her kitchen window. George had driven him away with merely a broom and a voice filled with fury. But George was no longer present, and this current situation felt more ominous. She took her husband's old flashlight and went outdoors. Blaze accompanied her without reluctance. Snow crunched under their feet as they moved circumspectly around the cabin. The air remained crisp and still. The only sound was the wind rustling through branches, like hushed admonitions. Midway around the dwelling, Blaze halted. He sniffed the earth, then dashed into a group of pine trees, barking incisively. Martha's heart jumped. She paused at the edge of the woods, the flashlight beam wavering anxiously. When Blaze came back, he held something in his mouth. A fragment of fabric, ripped, dark, and stiffened with blood. Martha gazed at it, her breath catching, not solely from the chill, but from a profound, encroaching feeling of being observed. She spun around swiftly, her eyes surveying the woods. And then she saw him, a tall silhouette just outside the range of her light, standing entirely still between two trees, cloaked, immobile, watching. She blinked, and he had vanished. A wave of panic overcame her. She hurried back indoors, securing the door behind her, her heart pounding like a battle drum. Blaze stayed by the window, ears pricked, tail still. Shadow and Rusty were huddled beneath the table, visibly disturbed. Later that evening, as an unsettling quietude enveloped the cabin, Martha ignited a candle and positioned the piece of cloth on the table. Something was faintly inscribed on it in black marker. A word, or perhaps a name. It was smudged and faded, yet still discernible: safe. Why would an injured person leave a warning? Or was it intended as a communication? She attempted to rest, but now every gust of wind felt like a presence at her nape, every creak of the floorboards like a footfall. Nevertheless, even amidst her escalating apprehension, one thought persisted. Whoever had abandoned those puppies there had not selected her randomly. And an intuition suggested this was merely the start. Continue following, because the subsequent part delves further into the snow than you anticipate. What Martha discovers could potentially alter your entire understanding of this narrative. The following morning, the snow had subsided into a misleading quiet. A dense, white silence covered the scenery, yet there was an unsettling quality to the atmosphere, an excessive calmness, as if the forest itself were in suspense. Martha emerged onto her porch holding a mug of tepid coffee that had cooled before she could sip it. Her purpose outdoors was not truly for the beverage. She was observing, attuning herself to her surroundings. Each crunching sound in the distance, every snap of a branch, now seemed more distinct, nearer. Blaze had remained at his station by the window throughout the night. Shadow had begun to pace in brief, confined circles, his ears reacting to the faintest creak. Rusty, the most diminutive of the trio, stayed near Martha's legs like her own shadow. She could sense the strain in all of them, and within herself. Her hands, which formerly quivered due to arthritis, now trembled from a surge of adrenaline. Then she noticed them once more. Tracks, the identical boot prints, sharp and recent, originating from the forest and leading directly towards her rear fence. This time, however, they did not encircle the property. They terminated just a few feet from the tree line's edge, as if the person who made them stood there, observing. Even so, she retreated into the cabin, secured the door, and drew all the curtains. Her respiration accelerated, not merely from fear, but from a more profound sensation: recognition. This was a pattern she knew intimately, the kind that insinuates itself beneath one's skin and murmurs, "You have been noticed." That afternoon, as she collected firewood near the shed, a sound rustled in the woods behind her. She whirled around, flashlight ready, and there he stood. A tall man, slumped with weariness, clad in a dark parka with the hood pulled over his face, and walking with a limp. His boot snagged on a root, causing him to stumble and steady himself against a tree. Martha became motionless, her pulse racing. The man remained silent, made no attempt to approach, and simply stood there, breathing laboriously. Blaze erupted from the open shed door, emitting a growl so profound it resonated in Martha's chest. The man recoiled and lifted a hand, not in a menacing way, but almost as if in capitulation. Then, without uttering a word, he turned and disappeared into the trees, engulfed by the pines as swiftly as he had materialized. She remained there for several minutes, attempting to persuade herself it was a figment of her imagination. However, Blaze's low growl and the compressed snow beneath the man's boots indicated otherwise. That evening, Martha found it impossible to remain still. Each time she shut her eyes, the figure reappeared in her mind. His limp, the expression in his eyes, the quietude he bore like an ominous cloud. She lit a candle on her husband's aged nightstand and retrieved a faded photograph album. George's laughter in one image nearly brought a smile to her face, but the feeling of warmth was fleeting. Her attention was drawn to the piece of cloth Blaze had discovered the previous night. Blood-stained, torn, with the word "safe" scrawled in unsteady handwriting. But safe from what peril? She did not sleep. As the fire diminished and the wind rose once more, she murmured to herself in the darkness, "What have I entangled us in?" Yet, deep beneath her fear, a spark endured, small and tenacious, the kind of resilience found in individuals who have already suffered total loss and possess nothing more to offer except their all. And at this juncture, events take a significant turn, for Martha is on the verge of discovering something concealed in the snow that will not only elucidate why the puppies were brought to her, but also place her directly in the way of something far more substantial. Do not divert your attention for a moment. The situation only intensifies from this point. The morning following the meeting with the limping stranger had a distinct atmosphere. It wasn't due to any lessening of the snow or moderation of the wind. No, it was the quietness, that unsettling calm where even the avian creatures appeared to be in suspense. Martha glided through the cabin like an apparition. Every window was now doubly secured. Each creak of the wooden structure sent a new shock through her system. Yet, it was not apprehension that held the strongest sway over her. It was the intuition that something more profound lay hidden here, not merely in the snow, but within the narrative itself. She required firewood. Her final supply of dry logs had been exhausted, and the puppies, now gaining strength and becoming more observant, needed heat. Blaze and Rusty accompanied her as she trudged to the area behind the cabin, while Shadow remained on the porch, guarding it like a watchman. The old stack of wood was frozen through. She reached for the corroded axe just as Blaze darted away. Barking with abrupt insistence, he vanished behind a clump of snow-laden pine trees. "Blaze," she called out, her heart faltering, her feet sinking into the fresh snow. She followed the path he had made until she saw him positioned at the verge of a snowdrift, his fur erect, pawing at an object partially concealed beneath the ice. Approaching with caution, she then perceived it. A dog tag, metallic, tarnished by frost and age, yet undeniably a tag. She gently brushed the snow from it with her gloved hand. The inscription was faint but readable: K9 Unit Officer Boone Classified Asset. An odd coldness seized her, unrelated to the temperature. Boone. The name resonated with familiarity. She couldn't immediately recall its significance, but a fragment of a memory surfaced, an old news report from many years past detailing a controversial program that had gone awry. Involving dogs trained for purposes exceeding standard military roles, enhanced, driven beyond their capacities, and the man who attempted to halt it had vanished. She hurried back into the cabin, her breath condensing in the frosty air, and searched through a drawer containing old news clippings and paper fragments used for starting fires. There, folded in two beneath an article concerning forest fire recuperation, was the headline, "Ex-military dog handler vanishes with classified pups, fears of illegal bio-training project grow." The photograph was indistinct, yet it was him, the man from the woods, possessing the same physique and the same tired eyes. She sat down, quivering, the cold dog tag resting in her palm. The puppies assembled around her feet, now quiet and serene, as if they comprehended, as if they recalled. And then the realization struck her. These were not merely forsaken animals, these were the precise dogs with whom he had disappeared. Blaze, Shadow, and Rusty were not common strays. They constituted the evidence, and her possession of them signified that someone, somewhere, desired their return intensely, perhaps even perilously. That evening, the sense of disquiet intensified. Around the midnight hour, a sharp impact struck the cabin wall. She sat up abruptly. Another impact, louder and nearer. She peered through the window. Only swirling snow was visible. Then, a flicker of red light, small, blinking. A drone. It hovered momentarily before darting off into the blackness. Her heart plummeted. Whoever was observing now knew their exact location. This was no longer solely a narrative of survival. This was a conflict, silent, obscured, and rapidly approaching. Yet, bear this in mind, at times, the most frigid winters ignite the most vehement flames. And Martha, she was only just beginning to feel that fire. You will not want to overlook what transpires when the stranger reappears and collapses on her threshold, because the ensuing moment in this tale is not merely a pivotal juncture, it is a disclosure. The snowfall had persisted for days, yet this particular storm was distinct. The wind shrieked with a desperate tone, and the atmosphere possessed a heaviness that imbued every creak of the cabin floor with significance. Martha stood by the fire, the dog tag still clutched in her hand. A muted knock sounded at the front door, 3 brief taps, uncertain and faint. Blaze emitted a low growl, not of warning but of concern. Martha opened the door slightly, just enough to look through the opening. What she witnessed barely registered. The same cloaked man from the woods was now on her doorstep, struggling to remain standing. His complexion was pallid, his lips cyanotic, and before she could utter a single word, he fell into the snow. She reacted without deliberation. In a matter of minutes, he was indoors, laid out on the old sofa near the fireplace. Martha enveloped him in every blanket she possessed, applied a warm compress to his chest, and administered broth with a spoon, much as she had done decades earlier when her son had contracted pneumonia. The dogs moved around him, not barking, not fearful, merely observing. Shadow nudged his leg tenderly, as if in recognition. When the man eventually opened his eyes, the initial word he murmured was Rusty. Martha tensed. "You are acquainted with them," she stated. He nodded, the agony etched profoundly into the lines of his face. "They belong to me. I brought them up." He identified himself as Thomas Boone, a prior handler for a clandestine K-9 unit associated with a private security firm that had once been engaged by the government. However, Boone's manner of speaking was not that of a soldier, it was paternal. They were conditioning these dogs for roles beyond mere trackers or guardians, he stated hoarsely. They desired armaments, unfeeling, obedient solely to orders. Yet, something had deviated from the plan, or perhaps it had proceeded precisely as intended. He paused, suppressing recollections. When I witnessed their methods, the castigations, the medications, the confinement, I could not remain passive. I violated procedure, took the puppies, and fled. Martha sat in silence, an internal tempest more violent than the storm outdoors. Boone appeared as a man who had forfeited everything. And truthfully, she recognized that expression. She had borne it herself. "My associate," he appended softly, "did not survive. They apprehended us near a dam in the northern region. I succeeded only in rescuing these 3. I abandoned them in the vicinity of your woods when my leg failed me. I hoped that if a compassionate individual discovered them, they might have an opportunity." Martha nodded deliberately. "They did, and so did I." In that instant, a palpable change occurred in the room. 2 strangers, each fractured by the world in distinct manners, sat opposite one another, linked by 3 remarkable dogs and the intangible burden of decisions they could not reverse. However, Boone's account included an admonition. "They will not cease," he declared. "You have protected them for this duration, but now that they have located you, drones, tracks, the bloodied fabric, they are drawing nearer, and they will be indifferent to any collateral harm." Martha did not recoil. She had endured sorrow, solitude, and the bereavement of everyone she had ever cherished. She had emerged from it all scarred, indeed, yet still resilient. "I do not fear individuals who dispatch machines," she stated softly. "I have confronted a grief that cannot be dismissed with a remote control." Boone offered a faint smile, almost incredulously. "You possess more strength than your appearance suggests." She shrugged. "Do we not all?" Yet, outdoors, the snow was no longer descending gently and silently. It was intensifying, falling more loudly, rapidly, and urgently. And within that storm, another element was present: headlights. 2 of them advancing slowly because the path they had attempted to evade had finally overtaken them. And what transpires next? Suffice it to say, the tranquil cabin will not remain so for much longer. The events to come will put loyalty, affection, and survival itself to the test. The snow battered the windows like an alert. Boone was now standing, limping yet vigilant, his gaze fixed on the advancing headlights. Martha posed no questions about the course of action, it was unnecessary. Certain instincts remained perennial, regardless of their dormancy. She secured the front door, then the rear. She re-examined the rifle George had bequeathed her, an antiquated, dusty, and cumbersome weapon, yet loaded. She had not discharged it in many years. Her hands trembled as she gripped it, but she showed no sign of wavering. The dogs sensed the change as well. Blaze emitted a deep, throaty growl. Rusty cowered by the table. Shadow stood watch at the door like a soldier at his post. They were no longer concealing themselves, they were prepared. Boone peered through the slit in the curtain. "They are not police. No license plates, no insignia. That signifies private operators, which implies no regulations," Martha murmured. 2 black SUVs halted just past the tree line, their headlights slicing through the storm like blades. 4 men alighted, attired in tactical equipment, masked, and carrying weapons. Flashlights were activated. They advanced slowly, systematically, scanning the snow-laden woods with their light beams. Blaze darted to the rear window, his tail erect, body rigid. Someone was encircling the cabin. Boone, Martha stated without turning, if this concerns the dogs, you are not permitted to surrender yourself. You did all you were able. Now we safeguard what remains. He gazed at her, astonished. You are not even acquainted with them. I recognize fidelity when I encounter it, she replied. And I have witnessed a sufficient number of individuals abandon it. The initial knock sounded composed, empty. A coldness permeated the cabin, unrelated to the ambient temperature. Step outside, a voice commanded. Surrender the assets. No inquiries. No indictments. Assets. That term tore at something within her. She opened the window just wide enough to exclaim, they are not assets. They are family. Silence. Then a second knock, this time more forceful. They were no longer making requests. Boone advanced, hand uplifted. Allow me to go. They will withdraw if they apprehend me. But before Martha could intervene, Blaze charged. He forced the door open and disappeared into the snowstorm. A bark, succeeded by a scream, rent the air. A struggle, a gunshot. Boone hurried outdoors, Martha following, her heart thumping like thunder. One of the men lay in the snow, shouting, his weapon several yards away. Blaze stood over him, not biting, merely pinning him down. The other operatives retreated, momentarily taken aback. Then occurred the unexpected development, a siren. A new vehicle approached from the opposite side of the woods, navigating through the trees like a rescuer on wheels, a local sheriff's truck. And trailing it, another car, from which emerged a woman with a press credential and a camera suspended around her shoulder. Boone blinked. No, that's Rachel. An acquaintance of yours? Martha inquired. She's the one who attempted to expose the situation. The armed men became motionless, irresolute. They had not anticipated witnesses, particularly not the kind capable of disseminating the truth in mere seconds. You are being documented, Rachel shouted. Desist or become infamous. And just like that, the snow seemed to quiet once more. Because at times, even in the most profound tempest, truth finds a way to emerge. And what follows? The concluding segment of this narrative, because what commenced as a rescue culminates in something far more significant, a decision that will redefine the essence of protection, affection, and advocacy for those unable to speak for themselves. The final chapter is one you will never forget. The instant the sheriff's vehicle came into sight, time appeared to fragment. The operatives froze, surprised not by an exchange of fire, but by the prospect of being held responsible. No one had anticipated the involvement of law enforcement nor the presence of witnesses. And assuredly, no one had foreseen a journalist wielding the truth like a beacon in the shadows. Rachel emerged, her camera already documenting, her voice steady and resolute. Move away from the woman and the dogs, she directed. This broadcast is already live. One of the operatives reached for his communication device, paused, and then lowered it. Their instructions had never accounted for such a scenario. No one had informed them they would be observed. Boone limped ahead, partially shielding Blaze, who remained vigilant by his side. She is aware of everything, Boone announced. Every document, every trial, every concealment. If you proceed now, you will not eliminate us, you will incriminate yourselves. A confrontation ensued, not with firearms, but with veracity. Then, gradually, the operatives withdrew. One after another, they went back to their SUVs. No words were exchanged, only the quiet departure of men acknowledging they had lost their advantage. The snow consumed their tracks as the vehicles disappeared into the storm. Yet, something had transformed, something enduring. Subsequently, back within the cabin, the fire burned more intensely than it had in many years. Martha occupied her rocking chair, with Rusty slumbering on her lap. Shadow rested by the fireplace, his eyes at last closed in tranquility. Boone stood near the window, his eyes moist yet resolute. Rachel disseminated all the information. The video recordings, the dog tags, the sworn statements. Everything was broadcast live. In a matter of hours, the internet was abuzz with activity, hashtags, demonstrations, and official disarray. The long-suppressed truth from the whistleblower now resonated globally. In the ensuing days, the repercussions extended even to this secluded part of Montana. The organization responsible for the K-9 program was disbanded. Inquiries were initiated. And Blaze, Shadow, and Rusty were no longer considered fugitives, they were recognized as survivors and champions. The sheriff personally offered to attest to their character, officially registering them as certified therapy animals for the county. Boone declined an invitation to appear on television, opting instead to remain nearby, leasing a small cabin situated down the hill from Martha's residence. Regarding Martha, her entire existence transformed. The woman who formerly gazed at old photographs in quiet contemplation now laughed as Blaze playfully tumbled with children in the snow. She instructed Rusty on retrieving firewood, although he frequently returned with squirrels instead. Shadow, consistently the reserved one, seldom strayed from her presence, his companionship a comforting rhythm she hadn't known she lacked until its return. One afternoon, the local elementary school came to the cabin for a Meet the Miracle Dogs excursion. Scores of small boots hurried across her front lawn, infusing the air with delight and amazement. Martha, observing from the porch, enveloped in George's old blanket, smiled more broadly than she had in many years. "You rescued them," Boone remarked softly, approaching her. She glanced down at the puppies, now dashing across the snow with gleeful children in pursuit. "No," she murmured, her voice gentle, "they rescued me." The connection between human and animal had never been more apparent. It was not about a rescue operation, nor was it about retribution. It was about recuperation, a gradual, untidy, yet potent mending that originates from the most modest act of affection and resonates indefinitely. Thus, in a world that frequently overlooks its damaged elements, one elderly woman and 3 German shepherds served as a reminder to everyone that some narratives are not crafted for amusement, they are intended to re-establish belief. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is the type of story worthy of dissemination.